But I am so powerful, Superman Correa, no? That I can handle all the demonstrations and even more, the violence, no? From here. It's insanity.
That is Ecuador's former president, Rafael Correa. We went to meet him in Brussels to ask him if he's the one stirring up all those protests in Ecuador. Well, that's the allegation anyway from the current president, Lenin Moreno. You know, the two men used to be friends, but are now sworn enemies. We're going to be playing pretty much the whole interview with Correa in a moment. But first, for those of you who don't know much about Ecuador, here's your 101. Ecuador, Spanish for equator. Some call it the centre of the earth. More land than the UK, more people than the Netherlands. Home to UNESCO's first ever heritage site. Home to UNESCO's second heritage site. And home, at least its embassy was, to the fugitive WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, until he was booted out.
Good evening, London.
Ecuador, then, is quite important. And from the outside, it looks like it's been on fire. Protesters, including indigenous people, hate the president for taking away their fuel subsidies, which sent petrol prices soaring. But President Moreno said he had to secure a loan from the IMF, a loan that was necessary because of the financial mismanagement of his predecessor, Rafael Correa. Nonsense, says Mr. Correa, disparates, who claims to have left the economy in good shape. Moreno didn't need to bend to the IMF, he says. It's all a bit sad, really. The two men once worked together, Correa as president, Moreno as his deputy. And when Correa stepped down, Moreno ran on Correa's well-established leftist platform. But within months, he totally reversed course, cutting out Correa and doing deals with the IMF, which required him to slash public spending. Now the two men dislike each other intensely. Moreno accuses Correa of stirring up protests to depose him. Correa, though, blames Moreno for various criminal charges against him, which force him to live in exile in Brussels, far away from his beloved Ecuador. And when we met him in Brussels, we did find a world leader who was rather weary from his constant legal battles, a million miles away from his glory days as president from 2007 to 2017. And then he convincingly won 3 elections and was cutting a charming figure on the world stage. But now, of course, he finds his successor, President Moreno, blaming him for the protests. So that's how we started the interview.
He believes that it is a politically motivated and orchestrated event, and he is alluding to your involvement. Are you involved in any way?
I am here talking to you in Brussels. How can I handle the demonstrations in my country? So it's crazy. This is not an explanation for an economist, for a political man. This perhaps is an explanation for a doctor, for a psychologist, psychiatrist, something like this. Yeah. Okay.
He's also intimated that perhaps you're working with Venezuela's president, Nicolás Maduro, to destabilize Ecuador to pave the way for your return. You deny this outright.
They said that I am, right now, when I am talking to you here in Brussels, that I am in Barquisimeto, a Venezuelan city that I don't know. Everybody says that it's a very beautiful city, plotting and already executing the destabilization of the government, Ecuadorian government, Moreno's government. It's something crazy.
To say that it, on the basis that you couldn't interfere because you're in Brussels, I mean, we have the internet, we have mobile phones.
Of course, I am in contact with internet.
Right.
But I am so powerful, Superman Correa, no? That I can handle all the demonstrations and even more, the violence, no? From here. It's insanity. That.
Looking at what's happening in your country, you would still want the president to step down or call early elections, though.
They have to step down. There is no solution for that. The problem is Moreno himself. It's not the subsidies of oil subsidies anymore. No, the problem is Moreno himself. In order to solve this problem, Moreno must resign. he cannot continue the presidency.
He's not the first Ecuadorian president to face large-scale protests. You yourself, in 2010, had protests from indigenous people and also from the police.
No. 2010 was if you want, an insubordination of the police corps, part of the police corps, nothing to do with this.
Right, but you faced protests.
Yeah, but we have never had a social unrest like this. Huh?
This is by far much
Perhaps
larger.
the biggest demonstration during my government was 5,000 people in Quito.
Right.
These are demonstrations all around the country.
A referendum was held in your country in which one of the questions was, should term limits be set for presidents? And overwhelmingly it was passed, and the decision therefore means that you are ruled out from running again. At that time, you ran for the no campaign, but the yes campaign won. Does this mean that you would never run again for president?
We can talk a lot about this referendum because it was, everybody recognizes that now, it was absolutely unconstitutional. But we were against everybody. Only my political movement, political party, against all the political parties, more the media, more a lot of other real political forces, if you want, social organization, etc. It was a moment of really misinformation, manipulation, terrible. Anyway, we obtained alone 37% of the popular vote. Anyway, according to this referendum, in the second question, they prevented me to run for the presidency. But that is unconstitutional too, because it was any law is for the future. This
one was retrospective.
Yes, this law was retrospective, 10 years back, from 2008, in order to prevent me to be candidate for the presidency. They always should declare that everything was unconstitutional.
Which would mean that you're at status quo, where you are
They're
actually
taking away my political rights, my human rights.
Okay, so technically, legally, from your perspective, it could happen that you could run again for president.
In the future, yes. For these elections, not.
Right. When you look at what's happening in your country, do you have plans to return imminently?
But, well, I don't have plan. But of course, I have to be where I am most necessary. If they need me in order to run for vice president, as a vice president for the parliament, I have to be there in order to recover our country, and even more, in order to protect myself and my family, our families, because there is a political pursuing against us.
So he thinks he could be president again one day. But for now, let's switch back to the protesters. And even though they have managed to now get President Moreno to reinstate the fuel subsidies, from their point of view, they should never have been cut in the first place. But Moreno says he had to, because Correa had left the economy in bad shape. Is that fair? Let's take a look. The Correa decade was about spending on social programs like health and education, investing too on infrastructure, roads and dams and so on. The economy did grow at a steady pace, but driven in part by big loans from China, loans with high interest rates. When Moreno took over in 2017, he turned away from China and towards a more Western institution, the IMF. The IMF just lent Ecuador $4.2 billion, but it came with huge strings attached. The IMF insisted that in return for the loan, Ecuador had to remove import tariffs. It also had to slash public sector pay and holidays, and the hardest hitting of all, abolish fuel subsidies. Well, that caused a massive price hike in fuel. In fact, the cost of diesel actually doubled, and many Ecuadorians just weren't having it. Now, after weeks of protest, President Moreno has backed down. The fuel subsidies will be reinstated, but he says he still has to find ways to cut back on spending, and he knows who to blame. He says it was Correa and his profligacy that caused this crisis. Well, I put that allegation to Mr. Correa, and as you can imagine, he didn't accept Moreno's version of events.
Let's just go back to the causes of the protests for a moment. You know, they say the the government says it took away the fuel subsidies because it's a condition of the IMF loan, and they say they needed it because at the end of your tenure, the government had spent so much money on social programs, on loans from China for big projects like the Coca-Cola Sinclair Dam, which was operating at half capacity and is full of cracks. And they say that the interest payments...
That's untrue. Everything is untrue.
I know, but these are the
incredible.
reports.
Because this is a professional liar.
And I'm going to give you a chance to say that. But the interest payments to China are crippling. So it was necessary to take the IMF loan, they say.
No, not at all.
What would you have done?
He's forgetting to mention that he decreased taxes for the rich people. He eliminated tariff from imports. He increased it. He created, or he installed again inefficient subsidies like for the social security. And even more, he cut the internal financial sources like from the social security and the central bank itself. The central bank has our money, the public money. They prohibit to get money from the central bank, to receive loans from the central bank. That is crazy. It's a stupid economy.
Over the 10 years that you were president...
But let me answer your question.
Oh, okay.
These are official figures. I took them this morning for this interview. This is not from Correa political party, it's from the central bank.
Right.
And you can see, for instance, official figures, 2016, total debt related to the GDP. I was president until the first part of 2017. Mm-hmm.
Something like 40% of GDP?
38.2%.
Which is very healthy compared to many European countries.
Very low. We are classified as a low indebtedness country.
Yeah.
But that was a huge lie in order to justify all these adjustments to have to be subordinated to the IMF.
There are many European countries that would love that sort of debt to
For
GDP
instance,
ratio.
Belgium.
But let me ask you about the over-reliance.
Has more than 100%.
Oh, I know.
Ratio.
Do you think that during your 10 years as president, you should have made the economy less reliant on oil? Was that something you could have done?
I did so. At the beginning of my term, the most important public revenue was from oil. At the end of my term, it was taxes. I even more with the fall of the oil prices. Okay, we are going back in every sector, everything. For instance, poverty increased. During the last 2 years, poverty started to grow again, and 500,000 people, Ecuadorian people, are again in poverty, in poverty situation. Among them, or perhaps most part of them, are indigenous people. They return, the government returned to the one teacher school, the worst education for indigenous people, in order to have a deal with the indigenous leader, because in this way they can control the community with the school, controlling the school. But it's the worst education for these people, for the poorest. It's crazy.
In 2007, when you were first inaugurated, indigenous people embraced you. They gave you a lot of their support. You were the first president to be invested by the indigenous people, and you said at that time, "I will never let you down." Do you feel that during your presidency you did let them down, you could have done more for them?
Always you can do more, but on the contrary, they were always our most important target, social target, because they have been excluded historically. I work with indigenous people. I live 1 year of my life at 3,600 meters above sea level. I was born in a city 4 meters above sea level. I went to work with indigenous people during 1 year. I have very good friends from Indian friends. So that has.
I mention it because
they have been always our most important goal, but you have to know how to help them.
But I mentioned it because in 2010 there was a rather unfortunate period of time when your government was using anti-terror laws against them because they were protesting that they hadn't been included in a summit. And even Human Rights Watch and I think Monica Chadji have said that this was a very bad episode for indigenous people.
Monica Chadji was my first communication secretary, and she's a very bad person, come on.
So she turned against you for political reasons.
Human Rights Watch, it's a political organization, it's not a human rights organization.
Then why use the anti-terror laws?
It's another lie.
Did you not use anti-terror laws?
No, that was a mistake in the former code. It was corrected in the actual code created by us, approved during my presidency. But they took this as a pretext in order to accuse us that we are pursuing people. We are pursuing people because accusing them of terrorism. No, it was a bad classification of the infraction, if you want. But it's always like this. No, they manipulate everything.
Well, President Moreno has now struck a deal with indigenous leaders to bring the violent protests to an end. In a live state broadcast, Moreno announced that he would reinstate the contentious fuel subsidies. In return, indigenous leaders called an end to the protests which had crippled the country for nearly 2 weeks.
Con esto, decirlo a todos los presidentes de las nacionalidades y pueblos del Ecuador, informar a todas nuestras bases que se levanta la medida de hecho en cada uno de nuestros territorios por la libertad.
Well, soon after, Moreno wrote on Twitter that the original plan would be replaced by new measures that contain mechanisms to focus resources on those who need them most. Now, outside of Ecuador, Rafael Correa is arguably best known for giving Julian Assange sanctuary in Ecuador's embassy in London. See if this jogs your memory. The year was 2012. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange was out on bail in London. He believed he was close to being extradited to Sweden, where he faced sexual assault charges. But more than that, he feared that this was just the first step in extraditing him to the United States, where he was being investigated for leaking sensitive documents. And so, on June 19th, he knocked on the door of the Ecuadorian embassy in London, seeking refuge. Under Rafael Correa's leftist government, Ecuador welcomed the whistleblower with open arms.
I thank President Correa for the courage he has shown in considering and in granting me political asylum.
The embassy soon became a new London hotspot, with visitors like documentary filmmaker Michael Moore, footballer Eric Cantona, and pop singer Lady Gaga. Oh, and perhaps Assange's most ardent supporter, former Baywatch star Pamela Anderson.
I love Julian. He's one of the most interesting people I've ever met. He's very brave, and there's nothing sexier than courage.
In May 2017, Correa gave way to Moreno, who began cozying up to the United States in an attempt to rebuild ties. The country's stance on Assange began to cool. And in October 2018, Ecuador handed him a new set of house rules. They included limiting his internet use and cleaning up after his cat. Assange sued Ecuador, complaining the new rules violated his fundamental rights and freedoms, but Ecuadorian courts rejected the lawsuit. That marked the beginning of the end, and after 6 long years, Ecuador withdrew Assange's asylum in April this year, citing bad behavior.
Hemos quitado el asilo a este malcriado y ventajosamente nos hemos librado de una piedra en el zapato.
London police swooped in and picked him up for breaching his bail conditions. Assange now sits in a UK prison, fighting what he feared all along, his worst nightmare: extradition to the United States. And that is another thing that Correa cannot forgive Moreno for, the incarceration of Julian Assange. In fact, Correa once said, Moreno deserves the title of greatest traitor in history. He can compete with Judas.
Let's move on to Julian Assange. This is another big chapter of your presidency and something that everyone knows is related to Ecuador. You protected him, the WikiLeaks founder, in 2012. Why did you do that?
Because, first of all, it's our sovereign right. We didn't have to ask permission from anybody in order to decide to give asylum to someone. Secondly, we do not agree with everything that Julian Assange has done. But why we granted the asylum? Because it was very clear that it was very difficult for him to have a fair trial. And for this reason, in order to protect his human rights, we decided, and it's our right, to grant asylum to Julian Assange.
And you said that the Western media is laying the groundwork for Julian Assange to be extradited from the UK to the United States.
I do not understand why the Western media stopped defending Julian Assange. It's incredible. The double standard is incredible. At the beginning, they were supporting Julian Assange. At the end, that they let alone Julian Assange. I cannot understand that.
You must have your suspicions.
About what?
About why they've changed, they've turned on him so radically.
Well, there are a lot of inconsistencies about the Julian Assange case. For instance, if the crime, according to the United States, was to reveal information, secret information, well, Julian Assange himself didn't reveal it. There were the huge media, international media. But the United States
They ate it up.
will not accuse the New York Times, the El País in Spain, etc. So, for this reason, the United States targets Julian Assange. And perhaps for this reason, the most important international media are quiet.
Why do you think it's so important?
Because it's fairness. Because we have a politics based on principles. You cannot let down a refugee in your embassy. It's against Ecuadorian Constitution, Article 41. Moreno broke the Constitution, but nobody cares about that.
Well, as we've heard, Correa and Moreno worked closely together for a long time. Correa, the charismatic president, and Moreno, the quietly spoken vice president, from 2007 to 2013. In fact, a US State Department cable in 2007, published by WikiLeaks, described Mr. Moreno as a moderating influence on Correa's administration. Being in a wheelchair himself, Moreno pushed for new laws during his vice presidency to help disabled people get jobs. And when he left government in 2013, it was to become a UN Special Envoy for people with disabilities. And when Correa stepped down from the presidency because of term limits, he backed Moreno's campaign to replace him. And when Moreno won, he paid tribute to his former boss.
Los pueblos hacen la historia, pero los líderes aceleran los procesos. Esta revolución tiene un líder, Rafael Correa Delgado.
Well, that was 2.5 years ago when Moreno took over with Correa's blessing. But a lot has changed since then. Let's go back to Brussels.
You worked with the current president. You were president at the time and he was your vice president. Were you ever friends?
No. Close friends, no.
Always
We
colleagues?
had a very good relationship, but we were never close friends.
And now?
Oh, come on.
In your own words?
He's the worst enemy. He's pursuing us during the last 2 years, trying to destroy our reputation, or our families, our political project, and our country.
I know you spend a great deal of your time fighting legal cases.
Yes.
It's exhausting.
And very expensive.
Very expensive. You have
The last 2 years, I have worked in order to pay lawyers.
you had 10 years as president.
Yes.
Why do you feel it's going to take you to put the country back on track?
That is a very difficult question.
Why
because
is the
damage,
next generation not come along?
The damage is immense. It's incredible. It's very sad. That destroyed myself to see what they did with my country. In 2 years, they destroy everything. Because, well, at the end of the day, you can think, well, he's a betrayer. He hates us, but he gonna build something better, new and better. No, just destroying without anything new, without building anything. So there is a huge destruction. The damage is very high, but we have to. It's too late to regret. We have to solve this situation, to go on as a country. Ecuador is Ecuadorian people is a very hardworking people. we have been before in situations, perhaps this is the most serious situation, but one of the most serious situations, but we have had already very, very tough situations, and we continue. So we have to continue.
So when you think about the future of the country, what is your prognosis for the country, your predictions for the country?
The country is destroyed. The political situation is terrible. The social situation is terrible. The economic situation is terrible. But it is too late to regret. We have to work very hard.
Rafael Correa, thank you so much for joining
You're
us on TRT World.
Thank you for this
I appreciate
opportunity.
it. Thank you.
And thank you for watching. If you'd like to see this episode again, or leave us your thoughts on what Rafael Correa had to say, please check out our YouTube channel. But for now, though, goodbye and see you next week.